Claire Duvall looked like the perfect neighbor, and Officer Mark Holloway seemed like the kind of cop who could protect anyone, yet one of them would vanish without a sound, while the other calmly lived above a secret that reeked of death. Claire Duvall lived in a modest apartment building on the edge of Brookfield Heights, a town where everyone seemed to know everyone. She was the kind of neighbor who blended into the background so easily that most people barely thought of her at all. When they did, their thoughts were always kind. She smiled when she passed people in the hallway, always polite but never overly familiar. Children liked her because she handed out candy on Halloween and remembered their names long after the night was over. Older residents appreciated her quiet nature and the way she offered to carry groceries up the stairs. Her apartment, though few had been inside, was said to smell faintly of lavender and look as tidy as a photograph in a home magazine. Claire had no loud arguments, no late-night parties, and no strange visitors. In a world full of drama and noise, she appeared to be a peaceful exception. 2 floors below her lived Officer Mark Holloway, a young police officer whose future seemed as bright as the crisp uniform he wore. Mark was known for his dedication and for the steady way he handled even the most stressful calls. He had joined the Brookfield Heights Police Department straight out of the academy and quickly earned a reputation for being fair and careful with his work. He often worked late shifts, returning home in the quiet hours of the night when most of the town was asleep. To his neighbors, Mark was the friendly cop next door who always had time for a quick hello or a polite nod. He sometimes checked on tenants during heavy storms or after power outages, a small act of kindness that made people feel safer. Claire and Mark's interactions were unremarkable, the kind that barely left a trace in memory. They exchanged brief greetings when passing in the hallway or held the elevator door for each other. On rainy nights, Mark would sometimes ask if everything was all right upstairs, a courtesy more than a conversation. There was no hint of tension, no visible connection that would later make sense of the tragedy to come. They were simply two people living parallel lives in the same building, their paths crossing only by chance. Everything changed on a chilly October evening when Mark failed to show up for his overnight shift. His patrol car was later found parked near the station, keys still in the ignition and his phone resting on the passenger seat. At first, his fellow officers thought he might have been called away on a sudden emergency or had a simple miscommunication about his schedule. But hours stretched into a full day and then another. No one had seen or heard from him. His friends grew restless, his family frantic. Search teams scoured nearby woods, rivers, and empty buildings. Flyers bearing his photograph papered telephone poles and shop windows. The town buzzed with theories ranging from a sudden personal crisis to a dangerous kidnapping. Through all of this, Claire maintained the same calm presence she always had. She joined neighbors at a candlelight vigil, her face lit by the soft glow of flickering flames. She nodded sympathetically as others whispered about possible suspects and hidden motives. No one suspected her of anything. If anything, her quiet support seemed to comfort those around her. To them, she was still the gentle neighbor with the lavender-scented home, standing side by side with a grieving community while a young officer's fate remained a mystery. 3 months passed with no sign of Officer Mark Holloway, and the unease that settled over Brookfield Heights deepened like a heavy fog. His disappearance had become part of daily conversation, yet no one expected the first real clue to surface in the basement of an ordinary apartment building. Winter had crept in, and with it came complaints from tenants about a sour smell lingering in the lower floors. At first, residents blamed a leaking pipe or a forgotten bag of trash. The building was old, and strange odors were not unusual during the damp season, but this was different. The scent was sharper, stronger, and it carried a weight that clung to clothing and hair. Some compared it to spoiled meat, others to damp earth mixed with something metallic. Whatever it was, it seemed to grow worse with each passing week. The building manager initially tried simple solutions. He ordered extra cleanings, checked garbage chutes, and replaced air filters. Nothing helped. Maintenance workers traced the smell to the basement storage area, a maze of metal doors and dim lighting where tenants kept boxes of old clothes, bicycles, and forgotten furniture. Down there, the odor thickened until it felt almost alive. Workers described it as a stench that settled in the back of the throat, making it hard to breathe. They searched for signs of pests or a burst pipe but found only silence and shadows. Finally, with complaints piling up and the smell becoming unbearable, the manager decided to inspect each storage unit one by one. When they reached the unit rented by Claire Duvall, the air around the door was noticeably heavier. The lock clicked open with a reluctant scrape, and the door swung outward to reveal a neatly arranged space. Boxes were stacked in careful columns, a bicycle leaned against the far wall, and a small table sat covered with a folded blanket. Nothing seemed out of place until one worker noticed a large plastic storage bin pushed against the back corner. Dark liquid had pooled beneath it, seeping into the concrete floor. The liquid was thick and foul-smelling, the source of the stench that had tormented the building for weeks. Even before touching the lid, the workers sensed something terrible inside. They stepped back immediately and called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and secured the area with yellow tape. The basement, once a mundane space for forgotten belongings, transformed into a crime scene buzzing with quiet urgency. Investigators approached the bin with gloves and masks, their flashlights catching on the slick surface of the floor. The lid was pried open slowly, carefully, as if the contents might reach out and strike. What they found stopped everyone in their tracks. Inside lay the decomposing remains of a man, wrapped in layers of plastic and fabric. The face was no longer recognizable, but the uniform remnants and personal effects left little doubt. It was Officer Mark Holloway, missing for 3 long months and hidden in plain sight beneath the lives of unsuspecting neighbors. The discovery sent shockwaves through the building and the town beyond. Tenants who had passed the unit daily now struggled to comprehend that a human body had been decaying only feet away. Neighbors who once gossiped about plumbing issues now whispered about murder. And at the center of it all stood one name on the rental agreement, typed neatly in black ink, Claire Duvall. Police officers hurried from the basement to the upper floors of the building, their boots echoing sharply against the stairwell walls. They expected chaos when they reached Claire Duvall's door. Experience told them that suspects sometimes bolt, scream, or try to hide when confronted with a discovery of this magnitude. But when the door opened, it revealed a scene so ordinary it felt unsettling. Claire stood in the doorway wearing a soft blue sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back neatly as though she had been preparing for a quiet evening at home. There was no trace of alarm in her eyes, no tremor in her hands. If anything, she looked mildly curious about the sudden rush of activity in the hallway. Inside her apartment, everything appeared carefully arranged. A faint scent of lavender drifted from a candle burning on a small side table. Books were stacked evenly on a shelf, cushions were perfectly aligned on the couch, and a pot of tea steamed gently on the kitchen counter. The calm order of the space clashed violently with the grim reality waiting below. Investigators spread out, their gloves rustling softly as they examined each room. They expected signs of violence or hurried cleaning bloodstains, discarded tools, anything that hinted at a struggle. Instead, they found nothing but spotless floors and surfaces wiped to a gentle shine. Drawers opened to reveal neatly folded linens and carefully organized utensils. The refrigerator contained nothing more than simple groceries, each item positioned as if placed with deliberate care. On a narrow table near the entryway lay a small ring of keys. Among them was a silver key tagged with a label written in Claire's tidy handwriting, basement unit. The officers exchanged silent glances as they secured the evidence. Downstairs, Mark Holloway's body had been discovered inside a bin rented in Claire's name. Now, the key to that same space rested in plain sight, displayed as though it were no more significant than a spare house key. Claire allowed the search without protest. She did not demand explanations or attempt to negotiate. She stood quietly with her hands folded in front of her, watching the process with a detached interest, as though she were a guest observing someone else's life being turned inside out. When officers informed her that she was under arrest, she neither argued nor pleaded. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and almost gentle, though her exact words would later be lost in the paperwork and confusion of the night. Neighbors peered from behind cracked doors as she was led down the hallway in handcuffs. They saw no tears, no outburst, only the same composed woman they had passed countless times in the elevator. The contrast between the horrific discovery in the basement and the serenity of the woman accused of hiding it left even seasoned detectives uneasy. It was not just the absence of panic that unsettled them, but the sense that Claire's quiet demeanor was not an act. She appeared untouched by fear or guilt, as though the events unfolding around her belonged to a different reality entirely. Detectives worked late into the night piecing together fragments of Claire Duvall's life, determined to uncover a reason behind the shocking discovery. At first glance, her background seemed as ordinary as the quiet image she presented to neighbors. She worked part-time at a local floral shop, paid her rent on time, and had no criminal record. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a history that complicated the serene picture. Years earlier, Claire had been married to a retired detective in another state. Their relationship ended abruptly after a string of heated disputes, some of which resulted in police visits, though no formal charges were ever filed. Former acquaintances described her as private but prone to sudden flashes of resentment when she felt controlled or questioned. It was a small crack in an otherwise polished facade, but it hinted at a hidden layer of hostility toward law enforcement. The case took a darker turn when surveillance footage from the night of Mark Holloway's disappearance surfaced. The building's security cameras captured his patrol car arriving in the parking lot shortly before midnight. He entered the building carrying a folder and a small duffel bag, likely returning from a late shift. Minutes later, the footage showed Claire leaving her apartment and heading toward the basement. She wore a long coat and pushed a wheeled suitcase, her face turned slightly away from the camera. Mark was never recorded leaving the building. The footage was grainy but clear enough to raise unsettling questions. Investigators suspected that Mark may have gone upstairs to speak with Claire before vanishing entirely. Further examination of the basement storage unit revealed additional clues. Forensic teams found traces of a rare sedative on the lid of the plastic bin, a chemical powerful enough to render an adult unconscious within minutes. A prescription for the same substance was traced to a pharmacy in a neighboring city filled under Claire's name 6 months earlier. Records showed she had never refilled it, but the single bottle purchased contained enough to incapacitate more than one person. The discovery shifted the investigation from a tragic disappearance to a calculated act. Friends from the floral shop described Claire as meticulous and oddly reserved. She kept to herself during breaks, never oversharing about her personal life. Co-workers remembered her occasional remarks about disliking authority figures, though at the time it sounded like harmless venting. Now, those comments took on a more sinister edge. Detectives also uncovered a trail of online searches from her home computer about chemical sedatives, body decomposition, and secure storage options. The searches were spaced out over weeks, as though she had been planning each step carefully while maintaining her outward calm. Despite the mounting evidence, the motive remained maddeningly elusive. There were no signs of romantic involvement between Claire and Mark, no record of professional conflict, and no obvious financial gain. Theories began to swirl among investigators. Some believed Mark might have learned something about her past that she desperately wanted to keep hidden. Others suspected a deep, simmering resentment toward law enforcement that finally found a target. Each revelation only deepened the mystery, painting a portrait of a woman who concealed darkness behind the careful mask of a quiet neighbor. The trial of Claire Duvall drew crowds from across Brookfield Heights and beyond, filling the courthouse with an air of restless curiosity. Reporters lined the steps each morning, cameras flashing as she was escorted inside. Despite the frenzy, Claire maintained the same calm composure she had shown since the night of her arrest. Dressed in simple blouses and understated skirts, she sat quietly beside her attorneys, her face unreadable. While other defendants might glance nervously around the courtroom or whisper urgently to their lawyers, Claire remained still, eyes fixed forward as though the chaos surrounding her was happening in a world separate from her own. The prosecution built a case anchored in careful evidence. They presented the security footage showing Mark Holloway entering the building and never leaving. They displayed photographs of the storage unit, the sealed bin, and the keys labeled in Claire's handwriting. Forensic experts testified about the rare sedative found on the container and in the traces of liquid collected from the floor, linking it to the prescription filled under her name. Computer analysts outlined the chilling series of internet searches made from her apartment, each one a breadcrumb leading toward a deliberate plan. The combination of physical evidence and methodical preparation painted a picture of calculated intent rather than a crime of passion. The defense, however, attempted to sow doubt wherever possible. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the storage unit could have been accessed by someone else. They pointed out that no clear cause of death could be determined due to the advanced decomposition of the body. Without a definitive timeline, they suggested there was room for an unknown third party to have committed the crime. They questioned the reliability of the surveillance footage and emphasized the absence of any direct witness placing Claire with Mark on the night he disappeared. Despite these efforts, the weight of the evidence slowly tightened around Claire like a closing trap. Jurors listened intently as the prosecution emphasized the improbability of coincidence, her key to the unit, the sedative in her name, the searches that matched the method of concealment, and the absence of any sign of forced entry. Each detail, when viewed alone, might have raised questions. Together, they formed a chilling narrative too coherent to ignore. Throughout the proceedings, Claire's demeanor remained unchanged. She showed no visible frustration when damaging evidence was presented and no flicker of relief when her defense team raised doubts. Her lack of emotion became a point of fascination for the public and a source of unease for the jury. Some wondered whether her composure reflected innocence or an unsettling detachment from the gravity of her actions. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the decision was read. Claire stood without a tremor, her expression as serene as it had been on the day of her arrest. Even when sentenced to life in prison, she offered no plea, no explanation, and no sign of regret. The motive behind Mark Holloway's death remained as shadowed as the basement where his body was found, leaving a community haunted by the quiet woman who had lived among them while harboring a secret darker than anyone could have imagined.